thank you everybody for participating. Thanks for those that are able to, oh dear, closed captioning is on. That could be a problem. Thank you for everybody who is able to see this later. And this is the third official meeting of our Landslide LandAware Data Working Group. And so Ben Miras and I, Ben from the USGS, and I are co-leads of this working group. And so what we wanted to do is a couple different things. I'm actually going to share my screen really quickly to give a few slides. And just invite you really to participate. This is a working group, so we really are encouraging everyone to give their perspective, and it's an important part of how we advance and evolve this group. So just to check, can you guys see my slides? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Yep. Okay, so for those that are new to the group, though, I think most everybody, I haven't checked the attendance, is been on these before. So the goal for our Landslide Data Working Group is really to promote open data sharing of information, effective practices for how we can bring together different data products and even develop them using mapping methods, et cetera, and how those can be used for landslide model development, parameterization, or evaluation. And so at the beginning of this year, we kicked off the working group with 4 objectives. The first is to review data needs and opportunities, and that's one of the things we'll be talking about today, as well as to develop a set of benchmark data sets. And we can speak today about what we mean by benchmark, but identifying potential data sets that can be used to either evaluate or validate models, and even can serve as reference data sets for those that have been well vetted. Again, we can define what that means to really advance our understanding of inventories to inform landslide modeling and early warning systems. And then the third is this idea of developing or conceptualizing a centralized portal or repository for inventory, either itself or metadata. And I think that this is something we're looking to do maybe a little bit later, but we welcome discussion on that now, or I guess in the coming months. And then, speak to some of the applications or knowledge gaps in landslide early warning system data. And that also may be something that is part of the data needs review, et cetera. Okay, so just to kind of highlight these a little bit more, what we're envisioning and very much through collaboration with this group is first a review of data needs and opportunities. So this could be, highlighting, developing a white paper, which we'll talk about today, and looking at kind of when and how different data may be used in landslide early warning systems, and with respect to spatial and temporal extent, requirements, et cetera. And then again, looking at benchmark data sets, what are the criteria we would like to encourage for these types of data sets with respect to metadata, et cetera. And I won't get into the other two because I think, we don't want to do everything at once. This is very much a volunteer effort, but I think these are 2 things we'd like to kind of go forward with towards the latter part of our work. Okay, so for today, we have kind of 3 main things we would like to accomplish. The first, and I've included the link in the chat, and I could do that again, or if somebody else wants to, as soon as I stop sharing my screen. We'd like to talk a bit more about the benchmark data sets, and so there's actually a link to this in the attendance link too, so it's linking to another Google spreadsheet. We'd like to have a brainstorming session about the review paper, this white paper, and start to figure out tasks and contributions from different members of the group. As we said, this is a working group, so we hope you all can contribute some of your time to this effort, and the outcome would be kind of a cross really international effort to identify some of these recommendations. And then finally, what we've started is a science presentation part of this, and I was a bit remiss in inviting someone to participate to give a presentation for this working group meeting, but the hope is that I actually was going to speak a bit about the CIOS landslide demonstrator, and I'll talk about what that is. Several of the people in this group are actually part of that effort, so I'd like to make you aware of what that is. But then we welcome presentations for subsequent meetings, which we'll hold at a little bit more regular cadence than we have. And so I'm gonna actually add that to the attendance as soon as I exit my slides here. So with that, I want to just kick it over to Ben. If Ben, if you have anything to add, or if you'd like to talk a bit about the benchmark data sets, and I will put in the chat the links to both of those so that you are aware. So Ben, anything to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Dahlia. Great overview, and thanks everyone again for joining us. And it's kind of this incremental progress towards the goals that we've got. But yeah, as Dahlia mentioned, I think just focusing on the first two objectives and then keeping in mind that we would like to eventually have some sort of a portal to access benchmark data sets and for people to share their data sets and to really figure out what knowledge gaps need to be addressed through this working group. And so the start is putting together the paper, and so that's what we were going to talk about today, and just so that we have something concrete that people can contribute to and that we can kind of be collecting the ideas and working towards an actual product for LandAware. So yeah, I think the main thing related to the benchmark data sets, and if you have one, again, Dahlia mentioned the spreadsheet to put in, and if you don't have one, looking through what's in there already is a great idea to just get your juices flowing. We kind of envision there being a little bit of overlap between, I guess, what we put into the review paper and what benchmark data sets are, what everyone's benchmark data set recommendations are, in that the idea behind the benchmark is that we have a series of different, very different data sets that people can use to test their different landslide early warning system approaches for modeling. So I think that's all I'm going to say now. We can kind of get into the next steps. Was there something no, I think that's it. Great, thanks.
Great. And so if we start with benchmark data sets, I just wanted to open up the floor to thoughts, ideas, comments. I know that you're kind of, absorbing this in real time to a certain extent, but the initial thought was that we could add, data sets or knowledge of data sets that could be, considered as part of this, but or kind of representatives that we could reach out to. But I just was curious, kind of in this kind of collation effort, if people had thoughts about this activity. And if your microphone's not working, you can also put it in the chat. Okay. All right. So I think that, one of the questions that I have that we haven't really fleshed out yet is what constitutes a benchmark data set? What does that mean? I don't think we defined it anywhere. And so, to me and others can provide their kind of what they think the definition is, because it's an open-ended question. To me, it's really about, are there publicly available data sets that we can look at, right? So without providing a critique or an assessment of the robustness or the compilation methodology or strategy, the goal of this effort is to start to figure out what is out there. And if there are repositories that we don't know about that already do this, fantastic, and please include those. And so, yeah, Slido exactly is an excellent tool. So I think the goal is to start to compile all of these into one place and then have the team go through and discuss kind of how we want this moving forward. Initially, one of the things that we discussed, Ben and I, and then as the group, was when you are developing a landslide early warning system model, what data can you trust, or what characteristics of data are needed for a landslide, specifically landslide inventories, to both parameterize, to train, to evaluate the models. And so, this kind of segues nicely to the paper, because I think that, if we could provide a standard set of criteria that are relevant to specific warning systems or to specific modeling efforts, that might help to be a nice guide to the community going forward. But I was curious if others thought about other definitions or other considerations for just compiling this benchmark data set as we start to kind of amass more information.
So I see someone in the chat has put a combination of remote sensing data sets substituted by appropriate field data, just a thought. So I think that the comment there is that we would like to have, I guess, more broadly, a range of different kinds of data in which to test landslide early warning models, which I completely agree. There have been some papers looking at that already across different scales. So that this benchmark is really broad, the idea, but in my view, at least, the end goal is to have a number of trustable, publicly available data sets that then can be a place to go to initially when developing a landslide warning, and with which to compare how well, for example, if you're looking at AUC or receiver operating characteristics to evaluate your model, how well does my data set and my model compare here, here, and here? And so and that can be with using many different kinds of input data. And so that was the idea that we initially came up with in proposing this. Something similar was done, I guess, a few years ago with integrated hydrologic models, looking at surface water, groundwater model comparison project. I'll put the link to that paper in the chat. But the point is that there's some kind of consistent way to look at landslide early warning systems across the globe in different settings and try to just better understand data needs, data gaps, etc. So yeah, like remote sensing data, those are publicly available. Maybe we want to put those as kind of an appendix to these things like SMAP, which a lot of people have started looking at for soil moisture, iMerge, the rainfall data sets, things like that. So that may be kind of part of this benchmark data sets of like input data, but the other thing is the landslide inventory side. And so I think one of the questions to debate or discuss today is how involved do we want to get? Early on in the discussion, someone talked about all the geomechanical properties we need to actually test a physically based landslide initiation model. That may be going beyond the scope of what I had initially proposed, but if everyone thinks that that's a good idea, we can look into that too. I don't there's anything globally available, but I think our view is more of the statistical and empirical landslide early warning systems and the data you'd need to look at that, but I'm open to thoughts and discussion about that too.
Yeah, Dalia, Farooq here, actually. I also wanted to think about the data scarcity that we all face, and especially in developing or lower and middle income countries. So once this inventory is developed, we should do a gap analysis too, and what needs to be in place or how we can facilitate that data scarcity through participation. And, for example, we're working in the Mekong region, and that's through participation that we build these databases too. So I was just wanting to point that out in the paper that we can do. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Farooq. I think, what some of our work, I know Jean-Philippe has been working and Olivier, in different data sparse regions where, we've been working to build inventories, event-based inventories or multi-temporal inventories to start to address some of the data gaps we have. But, one of the opportunities of this kind of benchmark data set compilation is to kind of figure out where those big gaps might be, and maybe it's to guide future research, and especially if we use remote sensing data to a certain extent.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Mauro?
Stalia, I was wondering if we could add an information. By experience, the quality characteristics and the other specificities of this data depends on the primary goal of the collection. For instance, if you build a data set using historical sources or newspaper, this kind of data set will have some problems, some advantages, and whatever. So, in my opinion, we should trace which was the purpose of this data set, because this will allow to understand at which point we could use the data set as a benchmark in the validation process.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You know, I think that, and this actually segues to some of the kind of the white paper idea, which is how do we characterize the different types of compilation approaches and what would be appropriate for different modeling efforts. So, you know, I know in my experience, right, we have event-based inventories, which a big, you know, triggering event causes a huge cluster of landslides, and that's an important training for some type of model. But having a multi-temporal inventory, even imperfect, is important for other types of model development. So I think capturing that in the white paper is to inform the benchmark data sets is going to be really important, which is why these two kind of first parts are a little bit hand in hand.
I think this brings up a really good point in that we can kind of maybe translate some of this discussion directly into like sections of the paper. Yeah. So there's a gap analysis in terms of the spatial coverage, but I think Mauro, really related to that point is there's this idea of the duration of a record versus the precision of the record. And so we may have some very precise records on timing, like Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. We know exactly when that happened, when all the landslides happened. But then looking at you know, some of the longer historic records in Italy, you guys have centuries of landslide and rainfall data, and there's going to be some uncertainty in the timing. So that's maybe, I'm kind of just making some notes on what sections we want to have in the paper, and then maybe when we have this outline, people can contribute more concrete ideas or data sets that they know can kind of demonstrate those disparities, because there's no perfect 2-century-long data with perfect landslide timing and location and all that stuff. And so that's part of the idea behind the benchmarks too, is that we have the best available for the specific goal of a given application.
So do other people have ideas in terms of sections of this white paper? And you know, just to go back, you know, the idea, and this can change, right? We're absolutely flexible, is, you know, when and how different types of data may be used for landslide early warning systems, you know, with respect to spatial and temporal extent. And I remember Ben and I, we were talking, and this is kind of going back a ways, but this idea of choose your own adventure, right? So if you would like this outcome, go to this page. I don't know if you guys have choose your own adventure books, but and so it's almost as if it's like, I won't say a reference because it's just a perspective that our group is providing, but allowing maybe, you know, I envision an early career person looking to get into this, or a, you know, a new study area for a developing country where they want to get into landslide early warning systems. What types of information do they need? What are the different flavors of inventory data, as well as some of the input data to models? And so I think right now we're kind of focusing on that first part, which is the inventories. But what other sections of this, you know, would you want to impart to, for example, a reference document or kind of some kind of primer to get out there? Kind of what are the opportunities?
Alia, sorry, where we can find the index? There is already an index. There is already an index on the sections.
No, there's not. That's what we were hoping to brainstorm on now, and then the next meeting we'll start assigning parts.
Okay. I'll in the background. I can start typing out some of the ideas in a Word document and share it on the side, but that'll take me just a few minutes. But that's a good idea. Thanks, Mauro.
Yeah.
No, sorry. It's just because I was wondering if I lose something in the discussion, so it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Please continue. Any ideas you have, we'll put them into an outline and share it after this meeting.
Could you repeat the title of the paper? Could you repeat exactly the point of the paper? Is just on data, or is data plus models?
At this point, it's about data. It's not about the modeling systems. There's been a tremendous amount of literature and reviews on different modeling systems. Jean-Philippe is also leading a paper on data, but in a little different approach. It's more about remote sensing potential for remote sensing products. So we'll make sure that they're not the same, of course, or, you know, they don't overlap. But for us, oh dear, that's not going to work. Let me just put in what we were thinking. But I had
kind of put here data availability, needs, and opportunities for landslide early warning systems. Something to that broad effect. We can refine it or adjust it, but that was the general idea.
On average, okay, will it be important even to discuss the scale of the early warning or system? Do we want to stress this? Because now, you know, the data you need and the data you use are pretty different now, depending on the scale you are working. So I don't know if we should mention this aspect. So data scale versus requirements, so something like this. Maybe you can phrase better than me, but the point is scale, data requirements, and in data sets.
Yep.
I will discuss again the collection method versus the possible other advantages and limitations that you have. This is another point. Not just saying what it comes in mind, not really organized an organized way.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Ben.
There was other hands raised. Hold on, let me just see. Samuel Sagoni.
Hi, hello everyone. Okay, I had mostly questions, but I see that some of them has been answered by now. However, just a few thoughts. I would stick to data only. Otherwise, if we also put inside models, I'm afraid we lose control of everything and it becomes a book rather than a paper. And I will start by writing some different sections according to landslide warnings typologies, the type of model, which is also strongly connected with the scale, as also Mauro mentioned before. And because for each type of landslide early warning, you need some kind of data, of course. So I'm trying to wear the shoes of who will read the paper. Maybe he already has some needs and he already has in mind the type of early warning to build, but he maybe just need to know where that data can be found, publicly available, open, and so on, for that kind of landslide warning system. So I think the reader will be, the readership will find easier to find a specific chapter for each landslide warning system type. And yes, of course, publicly available, I think, is of paramount importance. Otherwise, everyone, each of us, we are all working with some data sets, but if they are closed and we cannot share, it's useless to mention them in the paper. Okay, then I'm totally open. The last thing, I'm totally open to include also physically based models. Because they are not very used for landslide warning system, but just because there are, I think, at least 3 big limitations, 3 big problems, and one of them is because it is difficult to have reliable geotechnical data with a good spatial distribution. And so since I'm working on that, it's also one of the topics I could contribute to write with others, of course. Yeah, I'm done here.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of organizing by, you know, the type of landslide early warning system approach. I mean, it might have us get into some of the overviews of the modeling types, but we could refer to other publications that do that and really speak to the data needs for each type, I think would be important. So thank you for those contributions. I see Olivier, your hand is up.
Yeah, I wanted to comment about like the needs of data and opportunities. And I think that the part of citizen science overall could be also a point to be highlighted. Also, I mean, the way it can be used, like regional, global, or local, I think that it fits in different topics there. And when I say citizen science, it could be like, okay, like the networks that we have set up in Africa, for example, that's one option. But that could be also from like, well, social media or this kind of thing. So I think that there is more and more also to get from this. And with all the biases, that it includes.
That's a really good point. I just wanted to chime in and say I'm trying to get everything into this outline here right now that everyone's talking about. I think what we'll do is Dahlia and I'll go through it after the meeting and then maybe make it publicly available for people to comment or adjust, because I'm sure I'm not capturing everyone's ideas quite right, but I just want to get things down in a way that we can revisit it later.
Right.
That said, but feel free to chime in and tell me to type something if I'm missing it. Great.
And I would add at the end future challenges. So what will be the future? We have the gap analysis. Then what will be the future challenges right now for the next 5 years?
Yeah. I know, one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning was about this kind of encouraging open data sharing where possible. It's not, of course, always possible, but, as was said, give ideas of where this data can be found, and also, identify what roadblocks, as you said, future challenges still remain in some of these. I know that all of you have worked on, in some capacity, landslide early warning systems or data development, and how challenging it can be. And so I think that, really summarizing those challenges, both as current challenges and future opportunities, would be a really important contribution for the community going forward. Yeah.
I don't know if okay. Do we want to propose something at the end? Do we want to? That's okay. We do all this analysis. We realize what the gaps are there, and the kind of data that are already there, which are the gaps, etc., etc. But the point is, do we want to stress or to propose something in this paper for collecting data, for instance? This is something that can be done or not, because there are a lot of discussion that can be done. In particular, I'm really thinking now, what are the advantages if I share the data within a given initiative? No, so we should find way to sort of incentivate this sharing. I don't know if this wants to be a point in the paper.
Yeah, that was a little bit of the idea behind the benchmark data sets. If we have a spreadsheet or some kind of portal to, here's publicly available data set, people are going to use it. People are going to cite your data. People are going to cite the papers you use to develop it. And so that was, I guess, our view, the incentivizing part. If there's other ways you can think of to incentivize it, please chime in. I think the recommendations about your point to kind of suggestions, I guess my thought was we could at least qualitatively talk about the advantages and disadvantages of all the different types of input data. I don't know about doing any sort of quantitative analysis. I think that would probably go beyond the scope of what we had intended for the paper, but just kind of based on our review of what, for example, some people have already looked at different satellite data for informing rainfall and soil moisture. We could kind of talk about advantages and disadvantages that they've already discovered in in comparison and contrast to other data sets that we'll have mentioned in here. So I think more just an overview of, well, what have people found relative to in situ rainfall, for example, compared to radar or remote sensing data. That's maybe the degree of recommendations that I had imagined, but I'm open to discussing that with people.
Yeah, and I see in the chat, Adityan was suggesting maybe some of the present early warning systems. So maybe like, you know, giving some examples with case studies always helps to kind of exemplify what we're talking about. And so that could be a nice, that can make a nice some examples within each of these areas to really hammer home some of this work. And I think I would add in what makes a benchmark data set. Absolutely. So, you know, I think that could be, you know, I think there's maybe some, in this paper, there's some summary, there's of kind of current activities, there's some kind of description of what we think, you know, some of the different topologies are, some of the collection methods, and then we can kind of have a opinion piece at the end, really to go to future challenges and opportunities and, you know, really challenges to the community of how we move forward. And I mean, and I know Michael's on here, Michele right now, or I think he's traveling, but you know, I mean, one of the things that we could talk about, I unfortunately wasn't able to make the last executive committee meeting, apologies, Michele. But I mean, we could think of this in concert with some of the other, you know, we could think of a special issue where, you know, this is a paper along with maybe some of the other contributions that we can reference. That's just one idea of being able to kind of summarize this in a bigger picture, because, you know, this could get big very quickly. So we may want to break it up into, you know, a couple peer-reviewed publications, or, you know, this complements some of the other more specific landslide early warning system examples that we have from our group or from the community that we're trying to foster. So that's just one thought. Maybe I'll bring that up in the next executive committee meeting just to see what they think. But
that might help narrow the scope, but it might also lead a lot more logistics to coordinating with the other groups. But I think worth discussing with the executive committee for sure. I wonder if maybe just the benchmark data sets is one of our recommendations, I guess, that comes out of that we, I guess, make the case for it, and then through our discussions and reading about this, kind of highlight the point of having publicly available data sets that meet at least a certain number of these criteria. And maybe that's the point of going through this collection methods, uncertainty scale, temporal coverage, each of these things where we'd like to have a data set that at least addresses one of those points as best as possible. Anyway, that's just a thought.
Yeah, I agree. I think that could be a nice thing to propose. Absolutely, towards the end. Mauro, I see your hand up. Is that a legacy hand, or do you have other thoughts?
No, just writing some notes.
Great. You know, are there other thoughts or comments from some of the other participants? I know I've worked with most of you before, so I welcome your thoughts here. Okay. Jean-Philippe, I don't know if you want to describe, you know, we have a paper that I'll just be briefly describing in the CIAS presentation I give when we're done here, or you know, after our discussion. But do you want to speak a little bit to the paper you're putting together about the demonstration of remote sensing assets for landslide mapping and landslide assessment?
Yes, hi everybody. Very quickly, so it's part of the wrap-up of the work we did, in fact, in the landslide pilots 3 years ago, over the last 3 years, sorry. And the main idea is to present very quickly the updates and the different techniques that you can use in remote sensing. So from change detection techniques to time series monitoring using INSA or optical imagery, and present a few examples that were part of the CIAS working group. And then at the end, this will be the most interesting part of the paper, is that we try to set up some criteria to give to scientists or to operational users, stakeholders, some ideas or which type of sensor, which type of processing techniques, which type of quality of product you may get at the end regarding, in fact, your needs. So and it covers all type of SAR platforms, all type of optical data, and all the processing techniques which are behind.
So this is actually quite a nice complementary paper to this effort because, while that is focused on opportunities for, using different types of remote sensing for specific types of inventories or information, this speaks to kind of the broader application and needs. So I think that, it'll be good to coordinate, but also I think it's very nicely complementary in some of the work we're talking about as well. Okay.
Well, it seems like the discussion is a little slowing down, and probably we'll get some concrete feedback on this outline once we refine it a little bit. I wonder, since we got about 20 minutes left, Dahlia, if now's a good time for you to go through the CIOS, good segue into that.
Sure, absolutely.
Does anyone else want to add anything to in the chat? Or
one point,
go
maybe,
ahead.
Ben, yeah, about this paper. I think maybe something that should be discussed is about the. I mean, if you get information coming from different type of data, like, okay, you have maybe image interpretation and something more quantitative coming from remote sensing or old reports or something like that, and that you put that together for your inventory. How do you scale the level of information to at the end interpret and build your inventory? So it's more about inventory where you have a long-term multi-temporal inventory, not something which is related to a big disaster, where you have directly a big typhoon, a big earthquake, and then the landslide. But if you are building something which is really an agglomeration of different sources of information, how do you maybe estimate a kind of quality of this information is of higher accuracy than another one, etc. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's something that we tried to tackle, at least initially, when developing the United States landslide inventory, that we have all this different information, some of it coming from media reports where it's, maybe a road cut failure and we're not 100% sure the nature or location even of the landslide versus, some states here in the US are going through with 1 meter LiDAR data and mapping every single landslide that they can identify with a really rigorous method, but it maybe doesn't have the timing associated with it. And so, or they may only be able to link it to a certain year based on aerial imagery. And so that's a really challenging topic because there's both the temporal and the spatial side of uncertainty data that needs to be integrated into kind of a long-term inventory building. There was one paper, I think it came out recently, that came up with sort of a bin or quantitative index for how well the timing is constrained and how well the location is constrained. And that might be a path forward. I'm going to try and dig around and find that paper and send it to the group as well. But some sort of an index to because people wanting to do a spatial analysis for susceptibility, for example, versus a very precise landslide warning system might want different parts of your inventory. And so that's something to consider when building it, certainly. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Excellent. And Aditya, I responded to you in the chat, but just the idea of, the kind of next generation of smart sensors or sensor webs with, either using advanced machine learning techniques that kind of are, routinely used, kind of the most up-to-date information. I think that's kind of like the cutting edge of some of these systems. But as you mentioned, some areas in Asia are already working on that. So like adaptive technologies for and what data could be needed would be great. I would definitely look to some of those experts to provide their insights, because I don't think I'm definitely not up on those systems yet, but it's an exciting foray into kind of new capabilities, especially at a local scale.
Thank you, Dahlia. I was just wondering on what kind of disasters due to landslides we are addressing based on these benchmark data sets? Because if we are going to address structural damage or cutoff of roads or highways, or we are looking at just human lives, landslides can happen anywhere. Like if you look at the Porgera landslide, it happened in a place where there was not much of population. So I mean, it's just a thought. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, what are we kind of addressing based on these benchmark data sets? Thank you.
Well, I think it's a great question we need to explore together. I don't think we have an answer yet, but I think it's an important thing to define early on in the paper in terms of, what are the triggers that we're speaking to? Is it just rainfall? Is it just earthquakes? Is it anthropogenic impacts? And then what are the outcomes, right? So is it the hazard? Is it the exposure? Is it the risk? I think those are the things we need to define up front before we get into kind of discussing the data needs. But I don't know if I have an answer. I mean, I don't have an answer. I think, please put it to the working group to provide some thoughts.
Yeah, does anyone have thoughts on that? I guess my view is that yeah, there's different types of landslides. So there's debris flows, rockfall, even just big, slow moving landslides that are disrupting linear infrastructure. There's warning systems for those. And so we have to kind of, I think at the outset, set out that there's going to be different warning systems, different objectives, different types of landslides, also related to, is it for a linear infrastructure or a population center or just in general? And so, yeah, we'll have to kind of figure out how to address that and make sure that there's appropriate data sets that span the range of types of landslides that you may want to have a warning system for. I think the challenge is going to be finding how to narrow the scope of what we're talking about, but still address all the range of topics. And so I'll try to get everything down here in the outline, and we can get more feedback as the months go on.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. And I think the outcome, the hopeful outcome, is that we have a peer-reviewed paper on this. A white paper is important, and that can be as long as we need it to be, but would definitely encourage either it start as a white paper being made into a publication, or just with the goal of the publication itself. So, I think it's going to be evolving. But so we'll post this in a Google Doc and put a link to it for you all to have access to and edit. And so please fill in information or thoughts. Please include your name if you'd like to be part of those sections. At the next meeting, we'll kind of go through the contributions, and we'll start to get more specifics into the capabilities and who will be contributing what. Anything else? Just give me 1 second.
So at that point, I think I'll stop sharing and let's leave the last few minutes for just a little bit of discussion about the CIOS project. Well, it looks like Dahlia had to mute for a minute. No, that's okay. Yeah, do you want to still go through your? Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the goal of this, to continue to put notes in the chat or contribute, but the goal of what we were hoping to do with these working group meetings is now to have a short science presentation at the end to talk about different activities. It can be a new warning system or data method. It can be a capability. And so what I wanted to just present on today is something that Jean-Philippe and I and Olivier DeWitt, Robert Emberson, and others have been participating in for several years now. And so this is excuse me. All right, so this is work through the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, or CIOS, and it's the collection of essentially space agencies and partners throughout the world. And so just to give you kind of the big picture view, CIOS has a goal of ensuring international coordination of civil space-based Earth observation programs, promoting exchange of data, and optimizing societal benefit to inform decision making, to really understand, how to use this data for public good. Under this CIOS, there are 5 working groups, and so we have been participating in the working group on disasters for several years now. With it started off with Sigrid Rossner, Jonathan Gott, Jean-Philippe, and I, and it's evolved into other people, which I'll describe, which is great. And so specific to the CIOS disaster working group, we're looking to really coordinate this Earth observation specifically focused on disasters. And so we have been meeting every 6 months. It's been virtual of COVID time, and our meeting, the next working group meeting, starts tomorrow morning. And so the goal is to highlight some of the projects that we've been undertaking and summarize some of the needs and requests going back to the space agencies for data, and then sharing different activities. And so just to give you a sense, there's a lot of different pilots or demonstrators. So the pilots were kind of this initial focus. There was a seismic pilot, a landslide pilot, a volcano pilot, and a flood pilot, but this is now morphed. We now have a wildfire pilot and some other activities, including the Recovery Observatory, geohazard super sites. I'm not going to go into all of those, but landslides are the one that's most relevant here. And so, we've had about 3.5 years of a pilot. And so some of the achievements that we've been able to work through, one is the Aladdin software that Jean-Philippe and his team has developed, and then the SALAD algorithm that we've developed at NASA Goddard. And the idea is to take different types of optical imagery, Pleiad and planet data, to really advance our modeling capabilities. And so with this effort, we really brought together the methodologies and we compared. This is just an inventory on the left from La Réunion Island, and on the right is from Vietnam. But we're comparing some of the approaches for the same event. And so this has been an exciting effort to really understand how to improve our rapid mapping capabilities with remote sensing data. Another example, and this is from Olivier DeWitt and his group, is looking at how synthetic aperture radar can be used to understand, for example, the Furu landslide in Africa, in the Bukavu area, I believe. And so the idea of kind of coupling precipitation, which you see on the bottom, with movement, velocity. There's a landslide shown in the white dots that's literally moving under a city. And so understanding kind of the patterns of that deformational movement is really important for planning. And then you can get this view through different stacks of synthetic aperture radar data to get a sense of the movement of this landslide and really track its progress. So that's work by Olivier's team. And then we've also tried to work with SAR, synthetic aperture radar data, to really look at kind of deep-seated landslides and how we can assess kind of where landslides might be moving in areas that we didn't know they existed. And that's actually a really tough thing with SAR data. Usually you know where the landslide is and then you can track its movement. But what if you don't know? Can you still track movement? And so with new satellite data coming online, such as NISAR, we'll be able to have more publicly available data to start to address these issues, not just looking at deep-seated, slow-moving landslides, but also looking at some new techniques for different types of mapping with like rapid mapping, looking at attenuation changes. And so maybe we'll present that work at another time. So this is, in terms of the achievements of the pilot, this is what Jean-Philippe was just talking about. This is the example of kind of how to use different types of data based on the types of landslides you're trying to map. This is all, we're still in development. The hope is that we submit this publication in the beginning of next year. And really the goal is to establish guidelines and relevant criteria for kind of the operational use of Earth observation data for the community, for detection, mapping, monitoring, and different spatial scales. All right, so moving forward, we started a landslide demonstrator, which is kind of, I guess, once a pilot graduates, it goes to demonstrator status. And so, so we've reconstituted the pilot into a demonstrator, and we have 3 applications. And so I'll briefly go over these, and Jean-Philippe, please jump in if you have anything here. But the first application is to look at how landslide disaster assessment can be conducted along transportation and pipeline corridors. And so looking at slow moving and rapid moving landslides to assess danger to where deformation may impact these types of key infrastructures. The second is using satellite data to support disaster landslide risk financing. And so we have a project that was funded by the World Bank. It's actually pretty much wrapped up by now, looking at Morocco, to give a demonstration of how we can use different satellite products and models and socioeconomic data to really get at a potential for disaster risk financing, landslide risk financing. And then lastly, this is where the LandAware activities fall in. Application 3 is really about coordinating and expanding the availability of landslide inventories and supporting advanced landside science. And so this really speaks to what we're doing here, and they're aligned. All of these are volunteer efforts, so you can see why we have to align some of them to make it work. And so, so we'll talk a bit about that. And so in terms of who is leading this, so we have Jean-Philippe Mallet from Strasbourg, myself, Corey Frost from BGC Engineering, and Clément Bichoud from Terranum, which is a company. And I can post these slides so you have more time to look at them, just so you're aware. But the idea is that this project will go through 2023, and we have different areas in which we're focusing. For application 1, transportation corridors, you can see we have areas in Western United States, in Europe, potentially China, that's evolving. In application 2, we're mostly focused in Morocco, but there's a potential of expanding that maybe in the future to Indonesia. And then lastly, application 3 is just about this global inventory approach and trying to get at just sharing of landslide data and demonstration of its use. So briefly going into these, so I have time for questions. Each of these applications has a lead. So Jean-Philippe and Corey are leading this. We've involved stakeholders, which is a key component of this demonstrator, pipeline officials, highway and train companies, and others like BP, for example, British Petroleum, to really get into understanding what their needs are. There's some new policies in the United States, for example, that requires more routine and quick response to some of these hazards. And so they're really getting into understanding how to use different techniques, INSAR, for example, and other optically derived techniques to get at like structure for motion, to get at how these landslides and deformational patterns may impact key pipelines. And so, you know, just an example of what Earth observations to be applied, we have identification of what's happening, where, what might be impacted, and then is there some type of monitoring or warning that could be used? I'm sorry, I'm going quickly here, but want to get through. In terms of the landslide risk financing, and this is work led by Clément and Jean-Philippe, and Robert Emerson led it from the NASA team, is to really implement a processing platform, a prototype, so not a fully automated system yet, but to figure out how we can bring in optical data and SAR data and others, along with modeling efforts to really get at how we can develop, you know, impacts and cost estimates, scenarios for landslide hazards. And so this was a request coming from Morocco, from one of the big financial institutions there. And so we're looking to develop a framework that can actually be applicable in other areas. So this work is just wrapping up, and we'll see how it leads. And this is just an example from the Morocco region. There were some excellent inventories developed by Jean-Philippe and his team, some in terms of using a combination of visual and expert interpretation using Aladdin. There was also some risk analysis or susceptibility done by Robert, and then also hazard and flow modeling, risk modeling going on using our LASA system, our FLOAR, and some of the other cost-based systems. And then lastly, looking at global landslide information. So this is where Jean-Philippe and Ben Miras and Olivier and I are leading this effort. And the goal is to really connect with some of the international groups. So LandAware is right up front, the World Landslide Forum, and then some of the other agencies working on this. And the goal is really what we stated in our initial remarks here. It's to identify effective practices, demonstrate the use of data, and provide kind of some insight that can really be used as a reference for those looking to kind of expand their analysis. And so we use different processes. Jean-Philippe came into that, explained that a bit, but the goal is really to start to move things forward with benchmark data sets, repository of metadata, et cetera. And so these are very much in line, and that started at the beginning of this year. So there's also other efforts. This is an ESA system that is developing an app for systematic landslide inventories. And so this is exciting. NASA also has some work in this area, as does USGS, but the important thing is trying to coordinate and collaborate across. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to stop, but we have some interesting new developments, such as through the Haiti earthquake, where we did some SAR-based landslide density mapping within several days of the earthquake to highlight where SAR data can be used even when there's persistent clouds to look at where landslides are likely. And then after the clouds cleared, we did some mapping in those areas to find there was quite a dense population of landslides, which you see in the black dots. And so this just kind of underscores, some of the Sentinel-2 data we used and the mapping from some of these areas. And so I think in coordination, Salad is going to be open source in terms of using that, and Aladdin has lots of tutorials. There's a lot of opportunities in reference to the LandAware system. So just in closing, in terms of timeline, we just started in this last year. We're looking to move forward, and we welcome your contributions. I'll leave this up. I believe this is the last slide. If any of those 3 applications interest you, hopefully including the last one, which is our system, our work here, I really encourage you to reach out. We'd love for you to be part of this. There is data available through data sharing agreements for this effort, and happy to speak more about that. But just wanted to kind of give that overview and see if we have any questions. So let me go take back to here. Thank you. Are there any quick questions as we wrap up the hour?
Thanks, Dahlia. We probably could have had a whole hour for that presentation. Maybe we can, at our next meeting, go through some of the questions that may come up in more detail. But anyone have anything now to ask Dahlia about this? Or
Jean-Philippe or Olivier? There's a lot of people on, Robert. There's a lot of people on that are really leading this effort. So it's a team effort for sure. And Jean-Philippe I think. Jean-Philippe, are you giving this update on Wednesday?
Yeah, I will pay it until 2 days. Yeah, sure.
Okay, we're tag teaming. Excellent. All right. Well,
yeah, as I'm I'll probably have some questions for you later, Dahlia, as I'm digesting all this. But thank you for wrapping up the hour. And I guess as far as next steps for this working group, think about what all the great opportunities Dahlia just talked about. And I'll get this outline into a little bit more shareable shape. And I look forward to direct comments from you and everyone else in the working group who wasn't able to attend at this relatively last minute. But thanks to everyone who did. And Dahlia, you want to wrap up with anything else?
We'll look to have. Oh yeah,
I just have a quick question. So the 3 of the opportunities that you were mentioning, how do I connect with those? You were saying
you can just reach out to me. Yep, email me, and we'd be happy to involve you in any of those applications. And I can also send you a copy of the presentation so you can have more time to digest it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we'll look to have these meetings in a little bit more regular cadence. There was a gap for a while when I was in a different position, so it's good that I can get back to my normal day jobs, plural. And so thank you so much. Please look out for our next meeting, and then we'll follow up with an email to all of you about some of the documents that Ben is setting up and the benchmark data set, etc. So thank you again for participating, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Please be safe.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.